Okay, so we left off on the last podcast. You were talking about Tolkien, but when we got off, you were like, aha, I should have talked about Steiner and Tolkien, because that's how you came to Steiner, through Tolkien. How did that happen, Douglas?
I was in the NSA. I was up on the, I can't name the top secret island, but it was spying on Russia. And the a colonel, one of the top people on the island was my teacher, Meredith Thomas, Colonel Meredith Thomas. Excuse me, Major Meredith Thomas. And he said I had to read these books as the first step of my process. I'm like, oh, okay. For a year, he took me under his wing and taught me everything that I know that's worthwhile.
And this was in an outpost in Alaska, right? So there's nothing else to do really,
Absolutely
but to read the books in this library.
Yeah, and I'm in the communications room, and I don't have to do nothing.
So
except change the crypto cards and stamp the stuff and read the stuff that I'm not supposed to read. There was a top secret top secret libraries, and then I read all of it. But anyway, so I just realized when you were talking to me, holy moly. When I read Tolkien, I was reading, because I read the Silmarillion right afterwards. I read everything.
Hey, Douglas, you're going to have to slow down, honey.
Sorry.
People can't.
Silmarillion.
Yes.
It's the history before Middle Earth. It's the history of Arda, A-R-D-A. But anyway, also we have to mention Harry Potter here, you see, because when we're talking about imaginative writing, and we start mentioning all these different people, you have to say, but what is the qualitative difference between these? The difference is what Tolkien and Lewis and Barfield all said, and Williams, it's whether the realm that you take them into is true or not. Now, here's the problem. Would I recommend Tolkien's Lord of the Rings? To read it. Don't go see it in a movie. If you go see it in a movie, it spoils your ability to create those images yourself. And because the images are so archetypal and profound and go back in history and mythology, and remember, the Inklings were obsessed with Norse mythology, the poetic and prose Edda, and with the whole Norse stream, what's called the Northern Mystery Stream, which is really the stream of Scythianus. So when they're talking about, in Tolkien, he's talking about, and he characterizes these two Inklings who all of a sudden go wiggy and go off on an adventure, and they're smelling the air and they're saying strange words. And every once in a while they look to the west and they say, lo, behold, the eagles of the Lord of the West are coming, or whatever. They go into these trances and they have intuitions, and that's it. They stopped what they were doing, disappeared from the Inklings for a while, went off. And where were they going? Towards the west of England. And then on the shoreline, they thought they were sensing something. And then they went to Ireland, and then they went to the west, and then they thought they were sensing something. What he was saying is, Tolkien was saying, I have a sense in me that I can smell the west. And the west was Atlantis. And he literally writes that in these stories I'm talking about. And so he did his job. He let us travel back in time. Now, is there anything in Tolkien that allows us to travel forward in time? Yes, a few of his fairy tales are time travel. And so I would say that the Inklings worked on this challenge, the Inkling challenge, for all their life. C.S. Lewis took it up really seriously after he wrote The Dark Tower, which I believe is one of his first things that he wrote that was certainly his first imaginative space-time thing.
So you read Tolkien first, and then you came to Rudolf Steiner?
Yes, I was reading Tolkien, and my teacher, Meredith Thomas, was giving me books by Manly P. Hall. And so I read The Secret Teachings of All Ages. Now, if you know that book, that's a very extensive book. You have to have a, what's it called? A
magnifying glass?
Magnifying glass to read it. Because
So you read that one evening?
No, it took me a while to read that. But yeah. I read everything. And this guy, because he was one of the top officers, and he was the chaplain of the island. He ran the choir. I was in his choir, and I was in all of his courses. So he was one of my great teachers. And he had a photographic memory. I've told you about this guy. He would read a book as fast as you could turn a page.
Yes.
And he remembered everything that he ever read, every word. He knows the page. And you ask him about a book, he'll tell you the publisher, the year, everything you ever.
Now, he's a different guy than the mysterious captain of the ship that showed up on the island that entertained these beautiful women there and this is on the military base, magically got onto a military base, and y'all walked away calling him the most interesting man in the world. Now that's not the same guy, right?
No, that was the
Okay.
same island.
Same island, different guys.
And I believe I have met that man's brother now. Oh, well, he's spoken to him many times.
Yeah.
And so, yes, on that island, and how he came to be on the second most remote island in the military and the most top secret island
I think he
in the
came to
military.
see you, honey.
It was the second.
Was it Saint Germain?
On the ship?
Yeah, the guy.
Well, I assumed it was, yes.
Yes.
And who did he meet with the whole time? Major Meredith Thomas, my teacher.
Right.
I believe he came there to meet Meredith Thomas. And it just so happened I was out on the tundra with my gang, and we saw this ship coming into a port that you can't land, and you cannot bring a ship into this port. This island has been split 3 times by earthquakes, and literally 2 weeks after I left the island split down down the runway, so nobody could land on it for quite some time. So yes, this is a totally active volcanic area, and this is a flat island. The wind blew across it. It was the coldest place you've ever imagined. And I was in the NSA, and we were in buildings with no windows and blah, blah, blah.
But isn't that the way of spiritual development? And people right now could be feeling that. You're isolated. There's really nothing left for you to do except pull those books down and start reading them.
Strangely enough, I took that job as a choice.
I know the choice, because your other choice was to go and learn to speak
Berlin.
German, go to Berlin. But in a way, you did circle back with the German roots, because now let's go back to the story of how Tolkien brought you to Rudolf Steiner.
Well, he didn't, but Major Thomas gave me the books of Manly P. Hall, and at the end of the most beautiful thing Manly P. Hall would say, right when you're getting ready to get the secret, he says, and as Rudolf Steiner says, and then he quotes Rudolf Steiner, and that's it. So Rudolf Steiner was the final word on everything with Manly P. Hall, and I'm thinking, who is this guy? But I couldn't come up with any books, because at that time, Steiner was like a secret, and his books, you couldn't get them. And the anthroposophists were so closed in their little cult that you couldn't get in. So I didn't come across his books until a little bit later than that, when I was in North Carolina, and I was walking down an aisle picking up a book I'd ordered, and a book fell off the shelf. And it fell open to a page, face down, and I picked it up and answered the question I was thinking about. Is there anybody who talks about the Akashic Records and Atlantis?
Well, now that...
And it was a Steiner book called Cosmic Memory.
Yes, and people will have that experience where you have a question, and the spiritual world answers you by you reaching out and picking up a book, opening it up just at the right page.
So imagine the greatest linguist, maybe of the modern age, Tolkien and his gang. Tolkien says, if you're going to write a history of England, it's got to go back to Atlantis. Well, that's exactly what Steiner says. He says that the Atlanteans left. They came across Ireland and set up the Hibernian mysteries there. They went all the way to the east and came all the way back. And where did they want to go? Back further to the place they came from, which had sunk into the ocean. So what did they do? They went into oblivion. They went up into the sky. That's what Tolkien says. But he saw that. He saw that Steiner said that, but he couldn't prove it because there is no archaeological evidence of this place called Atlantis, nor the place called Valinor, which was Lemuria, nor the place that he would call the Isle of the Blessed, or the Blessed Realm, which would be called Hyperborea, which is James Fraser in the Golden Bough, and all the great mythologists all talk about the Golden Bough and the land of Apollo, the sand where the sun doesn't set. No.
But what that does
That's there.
Is it opens up your imagination so that you can begin to see and experience how your existence goes beyond your physical body, and it goes beyond your birth and death. Because when you are asked, who are you defining yourself between this current birth and your death? Or are you looking at all the lives you had before and all the lives you are going to have afterwards? What is that being? Who is that being? That's you. And right here in this moment, it may seem that you're locked into this terrible prison that we're in on this planet. But this, my friends, is just a glimpse of who we are.
Well, Goethe called it the Urpflanze with the plant. You look at the plant, and you look at the roots, and you look at the stalk and the leaves, and you look at the blossom, the seed, and then it falls down and grows through the cycle again, right? If you look at the whole thing all at once, doing all of that, It's outside of the realms of time
Yes.
and outside of the realms of space. So
Yes.
there is something is raying into that plant
Yes.
that gives it its form. Those are angels. Those are imaginations.
Yes.
They are moral imaginations.
But if people are just stuck on the Hollywood experience of what life is, then they become very materialistic in their thinking. And so the way the Inklings, it sounds to me that they helped open people's imaginations up. See, I guess it was hard for me to understand what was a big deal, because I was in high school when this was presented to me, and I was already having these amazing experiences of spirituality. I guess that's what I would call it back then. But I knew enough to keep my mouth shut because people didn't want to hear that you were having those experiences. So that's maybe how people have to come to it, because they're so materialistic in their thinking. They don't know how to have an imagination.
That's correct.
And if you sit in front of television and movies or these games, you're certainly not going to know how to do it.
Absolutely. The imagination is the key to get into the spiritual world. It's the first step of initiation. Second step, then it's only done through moral steps. Second step is inspiration. Third step is intuition. When you're thinking, first step, feeling, second step. Third step, willing, comes into alignment. That's when your I am, which is also in control of your physical body, etheric body, and astral body. But then there's the three spiritual parts of yourself. Somewhere in between is trying to balance this. And so when you look to the spirit, it's like looking to this mythological, allegorical realm. But Christ used fables, and he said he had to teach in fables and images because only his apostles could understand what he said, the key to the mystery of the kingdom of heaven of my Father. And so if you understand what the fable is, what Aesop's fable, there's a moral in it. If you understand the moral that's inside the fairy tale, if you understand the moral that's inside of a true fairy tale, or even what the Romantics wrote as a Marchen, and in second I'm going to talk about Novalis and the Novices of Sias, and the books I recommend to read if you want to open up your imagination. Because if you can't create these pictures, you have no place for the angels to come.
Well, when you said Christ used fables to tell, these are stories or pictures, imaginations. He used memes. It was a type of meme. Because what is a meme? It is an image that, if it's a good meme, it'll hold a truth in the image, and it maybe even have the propaganda placed beside it, and a juxtaposition that your brain has to overcome the cognitive dissonance in some way. And that might be a relief that you might see as a laughter, or, anyway, they're little truth bombs. They've been doing this on Fifth Avenue and with Tavistock, with advertising our whole lives. But now out in the internet, we're creating our memes to tell our story and our narrative.
Yeah, David Lindsay in Voyage Stock Tourist, he says, okay, they're at a seance, and a god from another planet wants to come in through the seance, and he literally physically manifests, and you can touch his body and everything. And then an evil dude comes in and kills him. Well, he's only a manifestation of the spirit, but he kills him in front of everybody. It shocks everybody, and it's one of the biggest, weirdest openings to any novel ever written. And it disturbs people. People usually put it down at that point and go, that's nuts. I can't go beyond the seance. But during the seance, a being from Tormance, from Arcturus, comes to Earth and says, I'm the local god of Tormance, and this guy is bringing me here in a manifestation. I'm not really thrilled about it. So a couple guys come in, and the number of people are witnessing there, the two of the people come in, and they're chosen to go to meet this god, Certus, which is a Norse god. They're obsessed with the Norse, right? Also called shaping. So they get in this device and they go there, and what happens? They land. One of the three people lands by himself on a beach, never been there, but he can't get up because the gravity is too powerful. So what happens? He looks at himself, and he has grown in the time he's been asleep there, a parasized organ on his third eye, which can now, he later finds out, can communicate thoughts. He's got two of them growing just below his ears on his throat, and they can understand like the music of everything and understand what their true nature is. And he's got another limb coming out of his heart. They each have a name, and they each do special things. But if you're touched with this limb, it's like touching joy and love. And it's the most beautiful thing.
Well, because what he's
Thinking, feeling, and willing, imagination, inspiration, intuition.
He's describing super sensible organs of perception. And because they're super sensible, they don't have a physical presence. So he's trying to describe to you in an imaginary way what that organ of perception would be. And when I say that, intuition is a super sensible ability to perceive truth, but in an imaginative way. We've all had intuitions. But the one that I like the most is the one that's coming out from the heart area, the heart chakra, as I was reading this book, because whatever you need, you get. Whatever you ask for, it comes to you. There's an ease of living, an abundance and prosperity and a flow that comes to you because you've developed this organ. And we have talked about this before and written about it. We want you to see that this is something you can develop right now and have what you need. Know that you are loved, and it comes from the heart chakra.
Absolutely. And whether you go back to Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's Sorrows of Young Werther, which caused a lot of people to commit suicide or to create young Werther clubs, because one of the first novels by Goethe was so powerful that it changed the lives of many, many people. And they realized, my goodness, you just write it down and people believe it. Well, that was the power of media and the power of writing. And so novels became very vogue. And you have H.G. Wells wrote over 50 books. Charles Williams wrote over 50 books. You can't count all the things that these people wrote, and they're beautiful. But if they don't have the content, like we just described with David Lindsay, he goes to the world to look, another world to look for God. And what does he have to have? Super sensible organs, just as Tyla just said. Without that, he can't perceive what's going on. He can't even stand up until he has the blood of this divine being. Now, many people believe that A Voyage to Arcturus is the #1 science fiction book of the 20th century. I don't believe that, but I do know that it affected the Inklings in such a powerful way that all of them were affected literally up until the last writings that they had. They had to do with the first fantasy writings right up to the last writings that the Inklings had, including C.S. Lewis's student who was an Inkling, what was his name? Roger Lancelot Green, wrote many, many books. So these are very, very prolific people, but they noticed, just like the glass bead game of Hermann Hesse, which I say is nothing more than writing about anthroposophy, but he won't admit it. The glass bead game is a mixture of all the disciplines and sciences so that you find the wisdom, the truth in it, and it sounds like a fantastic symphony of history that is unfolding through linguistics and art and writing and sculpture and architecture and everything you can imagine.
Yeah, but what they do in universities is they want to put you in silos. You're going to major in English. You're going to be in, robotics. You're going to, and then you don't get to see this whole view. But that's to prepare you later in life to keep you in a silo on your job, so you never look over and beyond. I started out in urban planning and transportation. I don't know why, but when I got to graduate school, I was introduced to the humanities department at Florida State. And at that time, Richard Rubenstein was there, and he was just running these amazing classes. I just took one as an elective, and oh my brain just popped open. I think I was ready to have someone show me all the different silos that I could experience and explore. And that was my humanities graduate degree. Now, I didn't go and continue those studies further because what I wanted to write about was bigger than my little head and my consciousness at that time, being a young woman in my 20s, I didn't have the capacity to write about it. But once I saw the internet and how you could use social media and blogging and pictures and images, for the first time, I felt I was right in my space. This is my canvas, and what I'm painting and telling you is the story of Sophia. It's the story of unfolding wisdom. And this is what the Pilgrim Society and Prince Charles do not want you to know, because it frees you. It frees you in all ways.
Novalis says that history, or the future, should become a fairy tale. What does that mean? It means that we all have infinite potential once we understand that we're on the path of spiritual development. And it's a path that's inward. It is not a path that's outward. And right now, the subnatural path of the outward, which we talked in the first section of this, is stealing people's imagination. They don't have the ability to create pictures in their mind anymore. And what I loved about Tolkien and Lewis was they got children to read. And even Harry Potter at first, they didn't go see the movies. They'd read the books first. And that got basically a furor, a fire in their minds for imagination, because they would read and their minds for the first time would light up in pictures, inward pictures that they didn't have because the TV had stolen from them, or all their different devices, the computer. And so this is what it's about. It's about, can you reimagine a future, or imagine the new future in a way that we have new archetypes that will still end up creating moral stories. So is your life a moral story? Is your life a fairy tale come true? Can you say that once upon a time there was you, and that if things haven't changed, you're still there today, no matter how many incarnations? That's what it's all about. But if you, in the modern age, all that is stolen from you from 1,000 different directions, from toxic bombardment, you have to have an internal world. And that internal world is not only in your dreams, because your body's being bombarded then too, but you have to have something that you self-create. So when you read a book and you create the images, I was distraught by people creating images of the trilogy. I didn't want them to create images of the trilogy. The ones in my mind were much more beautiful.
Well, sometimes people will tell me that they have a difficult time reading the Gospel of Sophia. But maybe they don't understand yet, they will, that it is written in a form that is similar to Novalis, that was done on purpose to get you to arise, or help arise your own imagination and your image of the words that are spoken. Because the not knowing Sophia is a very personal experience. We can't say, do this, do this, do this. No, in fact, in many cases, we offer you several ways to approach wisdom.
In every tradition I know, since you've said that, I would have to underscore that by saying that the oldest writings that they have are what? Either their mythology, their fairy tales, their fables, their legends, things that are supernatural, they're paranormal, they're supernature, they're not subnature. And we have forgotten that supernature exists, and that we are the key that can get into supernature. We can open that door. We can use the crystal ball. We can choose the right of the 3 rooms that we choose. We can, 1,000 devices we can use to show that our consciousness can defy space and time. And so that is what I believe the people who write high fantasy do. They give us a doorway.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but you see our turkeys just flew in, and all of them are out there. I'm going to go feed them a little bit, because that could be the protein in the next few weeks. It was nice chatting with y'all.